Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
8:06 now on this Wednesday morning, the day before Thanksgiving Eve, we're going to call it, and we're going to make that trend. It's going to be a thing by the time we're done.
Thanksgiving Eve.
Yes. Happy
Love it.
Thanksgiving Eve, Patrice Onwuka. And coming up in 30 minutes, Dr. Ben Carson is going to join us. And it's always a great conversation with that man of faith. But first, Patrice, we turn to Gun Owners of America's Director of Federal Affairs, Aidan Johnston, who just scored a huge victory yesterday in the state of Maryland over their unconstitutional handgun licensing law. Congratulations, Mr. Johnston. Lay this out. First of all, happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for joining us.
Happy Thanksgiving, and thank you for having me on today.
Bet I wanted to get right to it, though. Lay out. This was a law passed in 2013, signed by Martin O'Malley, and the amount of hoops that one had to jump through and the bureaucratic red tape nightmare that one had to endeavor to plow your way through to merely purchase a handgun and own it and possess it to protect your home was outrageous. Lay out what Marylanders had to do and the victory that you had yesterday.
Well, yesterday was a huge victory for the Second Amendment against these kinds of permits to purchase firearms. There was the ruling you're talking about in Maryland, done by Maryland Shall Issue, the concealed carry group, and there was also a victory in Oregon against ballot measure 114. But in Maryland, you had to go and get a license from the state of Maryland before you could exercise your constitutional right to purchase a handgun. That's what the Helmer decision was all about. It said you have a right to have a handgun inside your home, and instead the Maryland State Police said, no, you have to ask us permission, you have to go get fingerprints, you have to do a form of training, and then you have to wait up to 30 days before you can go exercise that right. And that's what the court said was totally unconstitutional.
Well, and it's such an important ruling. As a Marylander myself who's gone through all of those hoops, I recognize, it could be discouraging as a gun owner. But what do you expect to happen next? I'm sure the left is not going to stop here. Governor Westmore already said that this law was passed in the wake of Sandy Hook, was not about stripping gun owners of their rights, but he doesn't have an answer for what it really was about. So what are you expecting to be the next step here?
Well, I imagine that the anti-gun state of Maryland, their leadership, are going to appeal on this issue, and they're going to try to reinstate this kind of unconstitutional gun control. That is to be expected from politicians who don't respect your Second Amendment rights, but they're going to learn the hard way as they appeal and as they get up to the Supreme Court that a right delayed is a right denied, and the government does not have the constitutional authority to tell you have to wait 30 days, that you have to ask their permission before exercising a right. That's not a right. That is totally in violation of what our founding fathers wanted. They knew that that right to bear arms was important to our nation's national security, to the freedom of Americans, and that's what we're fighting to protect when we take down these kind of unconstitutional laws.
What's the next step for this law? Because Maryland, they're not going to go down without a fight. They will try to infringe on Second Amendment rights any chance they have. They will fight this. Will it go to the Supreme Court, do you think?
Well, like I said, they could appeal, and hopefully the Supreme Court, which just ruled and gave us a great ruling on Bruin, that could happen. But the alternative is that perhaps the state of Maryland, the legislature, gets together and passes some sort of unconstitutional law that we then also have to sue and take down. We've actually seen that in a lot of states since last summer's Bruin decision, where they pass anti-Bruin laws that are nearly identical just to try to undermine the Second Amendment.
Meanwhile, in Virginia, which everyone thinks is a much safer haven for Second Amendment rights, there's a delegate, Dan Helmer of Fairfax, who is now putting forth a so-called assault weapons ban. These get struck down all the time. What makes them think that they can do this again when there's already standing Supreme Court decisions prohibiting something like this?
This kind of stuff is so frustrating because the government can't tell you which firearm you can and can't own. The founding fathers never did that. They never intended for that to be the within the scope of the government. And so it's totally outrageous to see that happen in Virginia. And we have to be super careful because they've already enacted red flag gun confiscation laws in Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. Now the next level is this kind of handgun licensing scheme or messing with concealed carry licenses or, like you said here, an assault weapons ban. That stuff is super dangerous. In Maryland, you can only own handguns that are on approved handgun roster. It can get a lot worse for Virginia unless we fight back.
You know, I think I love your organization because you don't just highlight the gun laws and rightly and fight against them, which is great, but you also look at the individuals who are harmed when they don't have access to their Second Amendment rights, particularly to protect themselves. And, you know, women in particular. Talk about why this is an important issue for women and even minorities who live in dangerous neighborhoods where police are not able to respond quickly. Why is it so important that we need to fight back and see these heavy restrictions on gun ownership repealed?
Well, we always say that gun rights are women's rights, and that's because it empowers an individual to fight back against the tyranny of a criminal or the tyranny of an oppressive government. And so if you put my grandmother in a cage match with John Cena, she's not going to win. But if you put a firearm in her hand, that really evens the odds quite a bit. And that might be a ridiculous example, but it proves the point that firearms are the great equalizer. They help people protect themselves. And that's what we're fighting for when we're fighting to empower individuals with their Second Amendment rights. And when we're trying to repeal something like a 30-day wait period because of some handgun qualification license. There are women who have murdered or abused by criminals during that kind of wait period. There are other examples of women who have gone out and purchased firearms illegally because of such wait periods and then used them to defend themselves. Like, thank goodness that they were able to obtain a firearm to defend themselves. These laws are unconstitutional. It doesn't matter that that was quote-unquote illegal. It's their constitutional right, and they protected themselves.
Yeah, and to answer my own question about why these legislators continue to do this, knowing that it's going to get struck down and other bills have already been struck down, it's politics. It's pure politics. Dan Helmer, the delegate in Virginia who's written this new so-called assault weapons ban, well, he's announced that he wants to be the congressman from the 10th District to replace Jennifer Wexton out in Loudoun and Fairfax County. And so he knows that this appeals to so-called suburban moms who don't like scary-looking guns like an AR-15. And, of course, Republicans say, well, that's unconstitutional. We have a right. And suddenly the entire election becomes about that man wants your children to die in a mass shooting at your school. And it's just it's disgusting. But that's where we are.
You're absolutely right, and I think he'll fit right in with the Democrats in Congress trying to pass an assault weapons ban like that. But if there are any of those suburban moms listening right now that don't like assault weapons or don't like the Second Amendment, really the Second Amendment is for you. What if you're going out in D.C.? It's incredibly violent. It's incredibly dangerous right now. The Second Amendment is so you can protect yourself. What about your children? What about your family? That's why I carry a firearm wherever I go, is to protect my family and the people I love. And that's what we're trying to defend for you.
Well, and that's the argument that the Republican nominee needs to make in that same race so that this guy never does make his way to Congress. Aidan Johnston, Gun Owners of America, thanks for joining us today with some good news, finally, about guns in Maryland, at least for today. Appreciate it.